Hi guys, and welcome to another episode of Dial It Up. Today we're going to be looking at damage. It seems like a very rudimentary part of the game, but it also can be one of the more trickier parts of the game when it comes down to doing all the calculations for it. A couple of weeks ago I went over the replace, then modify, and rule of 3, the golden rules of this game, and those are also going to be taken into effect in what we're talking about today. So if you guys haven't checked out that video, you should probably watch it before this one. Otherwise, let's get moving. We're going to go over damage value, damage dealt, and damage taken, and the differences between those three terms. So the first is going to be the damage value. And the damage value is anything, or the number that shows up in your damage slot, as well as the calculation going into your damage value. Much like the other calculations I was talking about with replace and modify, is that you use your damage value calculations to ultimately figure out how much damage is being dealt. The calculation for your damage value is you take your base damage value and then add, you replace first. So if there's anything that's going to replace that damage value, there isn't too much. There might be some special powers that do it, but usually you're not looking at a replaced damage value unless it's a locked damage value, and then you can't modify beyond that. The locked ones you're looking at Blades, Claws, Fangs, and Quake, primarily for those. And Pulse Wave. So you replace and then you modify. And your modifiers are going to be anything as far as Perplex, Close Combat Expert, and even holding and attacking with an object is going to modify your damage value. So replace, then modify. Now damage value has one more step the other combat values don't have, and that is coming from your opponent, where you have to take into account their reductions or ignores, which are you're going to look at impervious, invulnerable, toughness, and invincible. So once you do all those calculations, then that number now becomes damage dealt. Damage dealt is a weird number in this game because it is a number that is not a combat value and it is not subject to rule of 3. Originally there was it was very hard to get your damage dealt increased more than 3. So it wasn't really something that went through everybody's mind. But now we're starting to get characters that, instead of increasing their damage value, are now increasing the damage they're doing. So you've got characters like Thane, who increases his damage dealt based on how many action tokens his target has. Banshee, who increases the damage dealt if he has changed a defense power from something higher down to toughness. Major Victory does it to himself. If it's penetrating damage, it is +1 damage dealt. Gambit, one of the first characters that started increasing damage dealt. If he attacks with, if he throws an object, he gets +2 to the damage dealt on that object. So and critical hit was basically the first thing to ever increase damage dealt. So you can start stacking these things up, and it gets nasty because you're going to have your damage value up to rule of 3, and then anything tacked on top of that with critical hits, special powers, all that craziness that is changing what the damage dealt is. The other thing that gets a little bit crazy with damage dealt, when you increase damage dealt, that increases the damage that's dealt to all characters within the attack. So if, for example, say you've got Gambit and you're throwing an object with him, you're going to get +2. He also has 3 targets. So if you're going to be targeting him, the thing is why this is important with the 3 targets is that with his energy explosion. If you're going to target one guy and throw an object on him, that guy is going to get whatever the damage dealt value was, +2, and then everybody on the energy explosion is going to take 3 damage for the printed damage, plus 2 damage dealt because his entire attack is getting +2 to the damage dealt. It's going to everybody. I'm going to put a link down below because there is a very huge and complicated situation that was explained with the Phoenix, Cyclops Phoenix, the chase from Wolverine and the X-Men. And it kind of gives you guys an idea of how absolutely crazy damage dealt can become because of certain powers that combo together. I won't go into that because it blows my mind just reading it. So I'm actually just going to link it for you guys and you can check it out for yourself. Now that we've covered damage dealt, and the next part of that when I was talking about damage dealt and multiple targets is that all damage is being dealt simultaneously. So if you have some kind of special power, this also goes back to that Cyclops Phoenix that I was talking about, that allows you to divvy up how much damage, you can also move around that extra damage dealt that's being done because it's all being done at the same time and you get to choose where damage goes. The next part of that is that once you figure out how much damage is dealt and how much it's being increased by any outside factors, be it critical hits or special powers, then you move on to what is called damage taken. Now, damage taken is actually very different from damage dealt, much like any kind of terms in this game that sound similar but are actually different. Damage taken is specified by actually moving your dial. If a character has to move his dial, he has taken damage. Why this is important is because there's certain powers that activate just on being taken damage, like Mystics. If a character takes damage from attack, it deals damage back. Energy Explosion is a good one because as long as you deal damage with Energy Explosion, then you can create your area of effect. Now, the character doesn't have to take damage. So if you are only dealing 2 damage to a character and his reducer, say Invulnerable, is bringing that down to 0, you've still dealt damage to that character, so anybody he's adjacent to gets caught in the area of effect for Energy Explosion. So that's actually kind of a fun trick with Energy Explosion, is that even if you can't do enough damage to hit the head guy, as long as the attack is hitting everybody around him, you can still deal damage to people around him because that explosion is still going off. Another reason of why you're looking at the difference between damage taken and damage dealt are characters like 10th Anniversary Iron Man. Now he's got Impervious. Impervious is activated when a character is being dealt damage, and that's how you figure out where the reduction part of that calculation comes in. So if he doesn't roll the 5 or 6 that's going to bring it down to 0, then he'll be moving into the damage taken area, and then his trait is going to activate, where if he takes damage from a character assigned a relic or resource, he ignores that damage and rolls a die. So you do have the potential with him to reduce all the damage and then not have to go into his trait. But either way, with him, because of the specification between damage dealt and damage taken and the order in which they happen within that damage value calculation, you actually get both roll-offs for him. The other characters that have showed up are the Black Order with damage taken versus damage dealt. Is that the Black Order, if they have been KO'd, or when they're KO'd, they deal back the amount of damage they were dealt, not the amount of damage they were taken. So if they are on their last click and you manage to deal them after you've done that big calculation, say 3, 4, 5 damage, and they're only taking 1 click of damage, they're still going to deal back that 3, 4, 5 because they're shoving back how much damage they were dealt, not how much damage was taken. So that pretty much covers what I wanted to talk to you about today, about all of the different damage. And If you have any questions, comments, anything you think I didn't go over, anything you'd like me to explain more, just comment down below, and we'll see you guys again next week.